Good afternoon, everyone. This is a very special day for us, not only because it is the last research seminar in this year, but especially because it recalls something as ancient as wisdom of God Sophia, which has so profoundly influenced our faculty patrons, Kirill and Methodius, right there. And also anticipates the main problem of our planned TRIERTIUM conference in December 2025, concerning the synthesis of Christian wisdom in past and present. I'm grateful and delighted that our guest from Italy, Dr. Matteo Raffaelli, can be our guide in this endeavor today. Dr. Raffaelli studied philosophy at the University of Pisa and in 2008 received his PhD in philosophy from the Faculty of Humanities and Cultural Studies at the University of Bamberg, Germany. His dissertation Macht, Weisheit, Liebe, Campanella und Comenius als Vordenker einer friedvoll globalisierten Weltgemeinschaft was included in the Bamberg series Schriften zur Triadic und Ontodynamik. In this book, Matteo Raffaelli seeks to draw on the Augustinian foundations advanced in the early modern period in the doctrine of three primalities of Thomas Campanella and in the Pansophy of Jan Amos Komensky or Comenius, to uncover the forgotten possibilities through which the modern crisis caused by the current form of globalization could be overcome today. Dr. Raffaelli's long-standing interest is in the reconstruction of a triadic or Trinitarian ontology and its implication for a harmonious solution in the contemporary problems of globalization, intercultural dialogue, and the technological transformation of society. In this sense, he has collaborated in the last 10 years on a number of international scientific projects in the field of artificial intelligence. The topic of his lecture will be In Ec Consistens, Erwin Schadel and the Bamberg School of Triadic Ontology. Matteo Raffaelli will present the current relevance of the Triadic Ontology of Erwin Schadel, the author associated with the so-called Bamberg Trinitarian School, and, among others, Doctor Honoris Causa of Palacký University in Olomouc. Matteo, the floor is yours, and we are very grateful to have you here.
Yeah, I am very happy to be here. I'm not saying this as a formality. I'm really very happy because it is a beautiful emotion to be able to speak about Erwin Schadel here in Olomouc for two reasons. So the first one is a personal reason. I was bound to Schadel by a deep human and professional friendship. He was also my advisor in Bamberg, my doctoral advisor in Bamberg. And the second reason is, of course, the most important one. His philosophical production has an exemplary significance for Trinitarian ontology. And this production has never been adequately recognized, neither in his country, Germany, nor at an international level, with the only exception of the Czech Trinitarian Comenius School with Professors Karel and Pavel Floss. So it is no coincidence that Schadel received a doctorate honoris causa, for which he was extremely grateful, right here in Olomouc. And this is why I'm very happy to be here, because I hope to be able to give a further stimulus so that Schadel's work may be gradually recognized in the current debate on Trinitarian ontology. And I would like to thank the entire Faculty of Theology, represented by the Dean, Professor Ušek, and I would like to thank in particular Dr. Edward Fiedler, who with foresight is carrying forward research on Trinitarian ontology at international level in an area that, from my point of view, is the very future of philosophy and theology. So I will follow a written text. I will try to speak slowly and hopefully with a good pronunciation. but I will follow a text so as to make sure that I will make the best use of the time I have available. It will not be a detailed presentation because about the work of Erwin Schadel and of the Bamberg School, which is clearly not possible now, a detailed presentation. But I am, of course, open to questions, to insights into details in the discussion that will follow my presentation. Schadel belongs to the so-called Bamberg School of Triadic Ontology, together with Heinrich Beck. This is a relatively unknown, still relatively unknown school, also in Germany. And Beck and his successor Schadel are the main representatives of this school. They were professors of philosophy at the University of Bamberg, heads of the Forschungsstelle für interkulturelle Philosophie und Comeniusforschung, so Research Center for Intercultural Philosophy and Comenius Research, and editors of the series Schriften zur Triadic und Ontodynamik, so writings on triadic and ontodynamics, with a total of 30 volumes published by Peter Lang. And this series represents an extremely rich heritage for Trinitarian ontology. Or for triadic ontology. I said triadic ontology. And why am I talking now of triadic ontology in reference to the Bamberg School and not Trinitarian ontology? Just a small aside before returning to our topic, that I think that is very important, I think. So to explain why are we talking of triadic ontology. So the term triadic instead of Trinitarian is used by the Bamberg School itself to indicate a strictly philosophical approach. But this does not at all imply a dualism between philosophy and theology, as in the modern opposition between rationalism and fideism. So for the Bamberg School, in the sense of a cooperation between philosophy and theology, non-Christian philosophers can, on the one hand, contribute to the clarification of the divine principle of reality, while, on the other hand, statements in the holy texts, also non-Christian texts, can stimulate philosophical, ontological insights. I would like to give just a few examples that were particularly dear to Schadel. So he used to mention what I'm going to say now. In philosophy, for example, a classical example, Plato, who asked about the cause of all things and saw it in the unity of being, idea, and good, as well as Parmenides, Plotinus, and Proclus with their circle or sphere symbolism, which is then to be found in a systematic form in Nicholas of Cusa. So the totality of being, as in the circle, is constituted by three distinct and inseparable elements: the center, the radius, and the circumference. In theology, an example, the ex ipso per ipsum in ipsum of Romans 11:36. So from him, through him, in him are all things. Or, very interesting for Schadel, also for me, the sum qui sum of Exodus 3:14, which is interpreted by Comenius in an ontotriadic horizon. So I am who I am means for Comenius that God's being is from himself, through himself, and in himself. That means, I'm quoting now from the Anti-Socinian writings of Comenius, that means that God is from himself before anything else is from him. He is through himself before anything else is through him. He is in himself before anything else is in him. As the first being, He was naturally before all things, because all these things have their beginning, their middle, and their end from him. But he has in himself a beginning without a beginning, a middle without a middle, and an end without an end. So I am who I am. This is a beautiful example of how a statement from the holy text can stimulate, in this case, a very clear formulation of the ontological difference. So what we can expect from the Bamberg school is a strictly philosophical approach to triadic ontology, but not in the sense of an opposition to theology. So I will start with a brief presentation of Beck's fundamental intuition of a triadic ontology, and then I will focus on Schadel's systematic reconstruction of a triadic ontology. And I will try to underline the hermeneutic and practical relevance of this reconstruction to overcome the actual nihilism. About Heinrich Beck, just to give you some bibliographical references. I will mention here two books which are particularly important. They are Act Character des Seins, so the actual character of being, published in 1965 and republished in a second revised edition in 2001 in the Bamberg series, Writings on Triadic and Ontodynamics, like almost all the works I will mention in my presentation. The other book is Dialogic Analogie Trinität, published in 2009, which contains essays covering Beck's entire production. That's why it is so interesting, with a very useful and beautiful introduction by Schadel. Very useful to understand Beck. Beck's approach to triadic ontology is to be understood on the basis of his discussion of Hegel's dialectical principle, mainly in his book, The Actual Character of Being. So Beck argues that Hegel sees being only in the state of going out of itself, so of making itself explicit, whereby it goes ever deeper into itself in a negation. That's what he calls ideality, being as ideality or idea. But Hegel does not see, this is the fundamental point, that being's going out of itself is only possible if being is previously in itself and is only identical with itself if being is reality. I think Beck's interpretation of Hegel can be explained in the light of the end of Hegel's Science of Logic. So we are at the end of the process through which the idea is supposed to have realized itself, and the idea at the end of the science of logic is understood as idea of good, and precisely as a contradictory unity of knowledge and reality. Good is indeed, Hegel says, an absolute postulate, but nothing more than a postulate. It expresses being as a contradiction. That means being in a state of ideality that does not presuppose reality. Inspired by the doctrine of the transcendentals, so unum, verum, et bonum, and following Thomas Aquinas' view that being represents something not only absolutely active, but also absolutely positive, so an actus purus for Thomas Aquinas, Beck argues that goodness can emerge without contradiction only on the condition that ideality has emerged from reality. And he characterizes the act of being as an in one another of reality, ideality, and bonity. So goodness, bonitet, bonitas. So these are the basic coordinates. it is maybe important to mention something more about Beck. Hegel's repression of reality led to the existentialist conception that man is essentially nothing. And I would like to mention the Argentine philosopher Ismael Quiles. Quiles is a relatively unknown author. He cannot be said to belong to the Bamberg school, but he certainly collaborated closely with Beck and with Schadel. Schadel wrote a book about him. And it is perhaps useful to remember that Quiles was a philosophy professor of Pope Francis when he was in Buenos Aires and had a deep influence on him. So Quiles argues that existentialism, which wanted to save the concrete human being, so a very important objective, to save the concrete human being against abstraction, nevertheless came to the conclusion that man represents something lost in the world. And this is precisely what shows, according to Quiles, that existence, which literally means being outside, lost in the world outside, is not the most original aspect of man, the being outside. Man can only realize himself in a being outside, Dasein, in Heidegger, for instance, under the condition, can only realize himself in a being outside, only under the condition that he is first in himself. And this is what Quiles indicates with the term insistence, so insistere. So Beck's reception of Quiles' insistentialism led to his characterization of the inner structure of man and of the act of being, the actus purus that we have seen, the act of being in general, as inec reinsistence. Inec reinsistence in German. From an original being in oneself, in, to a being out and confronted, ek, the Greek ek or ex in Latin, to, third moment, a being returned in oneself or being in oneself again, so re-in. And from this also derives the term inec consistence. This is a possible English translation, inec consistence, coined by Erwin Schadel, which, in my opinion, meaningfully emphasizes the finality of the act of being with a term which is also used in the common language to express fullness of being. So consistence is fullness of being. In ec consistence. And the identified structure of the act of being as in one another of insistent reality, existent ideality, and re-in or consistent, I would prefer consistent bonity or love, describes, establishes a conception of being that represents, if you think, neither monism nor pluralism, but rather a graded similarity, an analogy, we would say, in interrelationship and dialogue. And this is, in this context, we can understand Beck's intercultural research project of a creative peace, which he carried out in collaboration with Quiles and with representatives of all cultures of the world. It is very interesting, so the writings about that I can give you later, I can give you bibliographical references. So this project aims to an order that is not imposed from outside or above, but rather is implemented from within by corresponding to the triadic basic disposition of human being, so this inec consistence. And this is also the philosophical context in which Erwin Schadel did research in Bamberg. So if we want to understand him. And the key to Schadel's thinking is the systematic reconstruction of triadic ontology mainly from a perspective on the history of ideas and mentalities. Schadel's reconstruction is based on an enormous wealth of material and number of authors, including, just to mention the most important ones, the Neoplatonists, Augustine, Bonaventure, and Nicholas of Cusa, as well as Kepler, Comenius, and Leibniz. And the critical debate is carried out above all with Kant. As already said, just to remember the most important ones. To give you some bibliographical references, I would like to mention here 3 books. The first one is his Bibliotheca Trinitariorum, 2 volumes published in 1984-88. This project aimed to examine the Triadic and Trinitarian literature as comprehensively as possible and to prepare it for further research. So it is extremely important for me, for example. Also for Edward, I know. The second book is Musik als Trinitätssymbol, so music as a symbol of the Trinity, published in 1995. Also extremely interesting. In this book, the overall basic structures of music are explained as an archetypal ontotriadic network. And the third book is Kant's Tantalischer Schmerz, so Kant's Tantalic Pain, published in 1998, where Schadel diagnoses the nihilism of modernity from an ontotriadic perspective. So let's go to the core of Schadel's approach to triadic ontology. This is, of course, to be understood in reference to Beck and Keeles, as we said, but can be really understood on the basis of his interpretation of Augustine's Trinitarian speculation. Augustine is the center, somehow the center of Schadel's thinking. And the term innate consistence is to be understood in reference to an Augustinian formulation that was very often quoted by Schadel everywhere in his writings, and that was developed in a modified reception of Plotinus' doctrine of the 3 hypostases, one, intellect, and soul, which are interpreted not as subordinated, but as integrated, so as a perichoretic indwelling. And in particular, it is to be understood in particular as in reference to a modified reception of Proclus' conception of being as a rhythm of remaining, procession, and return. So, monet, prodos, epistrophe. And this Augustinian formulation reads, every being is one in which it consists, another one in which it is distinguished, and another one in which it corresponds. So the Latin, the original is omne quod est, aliud est quo constat, aliud quo discernitur, aliud quo congruit. Influenced by Proclus' triad of remaining, procession, and return. This is from De Diversis Questionibus 83, Quaestio 18, De Trinitate, Augustine. So, according to Schadel, this is to be linked, this formulation, which he finds so interesting, is mentioned everywhere in Schadel's writings, is to be linked to Augustine's well-known, if I am mistaken, I am, si fallor sum. So Augustine argues that every possibility of deceit, extreme deceit, necessarily implies the being of the one who deceives. So the being, and this very connection to being is recognized or known, and for the sake of self-fulfillment, also desired or love. And the indwelling of being, knowing, and wanting, or loving, so esse nosse velle or amare, determined in this way implies that the integral self-knowledge of man is always to be understood as a knowledge of being. So the inner constitution of being can be characterized, according to Schadel, to Augustine and Schadel, as an inseparable difference, so inseparabilis distinctio, of three dimensions, a nontic one, a basic one, a nontic one, in which the spontaneity of the basic ground of being, we could say, insists, a logical one, in which being comes to its existent form and is clarified in its essential structure, and an ethical one, Schadel says, always speaks of ontologo-ethical totality. An ethical one, the third one, in which that essential structure that came to its existent form, that came to clarification, gains its consistent self-correspondence in spontaneous being, and is thereby able to release creative forces. That's wanting, willing. So, as already said, Schadel speaks always of an ontologo-ethical wholeness. But why is the Augustinian esse nosse velle or amare so important for Schadel? This is, in my opinion, one of the most important statements of Schadel. Schadel argues that, in reference to Augustine, human interiority as such has overcome space, that's clear, but it is still affected by time, which it experiences as a no longer and or a not yet. But an inseparable difference, if we think, cannot be affected by time, because in time nothing is inseparable from the other, but always before or after the other. So it constitutes the reality of being, this inseparabilis distinctio, in its pure absolute positivity. And in order to find itself, it is therefore necessary for human interiority to detemporalize itself in God, because ontologically speaking, God is the intrinsically unlimited actuality of that three-dimensionality in which everything that exists in space and time participates in a specifically limited way. So that unlimited actuality, which is a three-dimensional actuality. This is a very strong argument. So an inseparable distinction cannot be in time and cannot be denied. So the one, as we saw, if I am mistaken, I am. So being cannot be denied and is loved for the sake of self-fulfillment. What I'm looking for is truth and fullness of being. So this three-dimensional actuality, we could mention here Bonaventure or Thomas Aquinas with their causa efficiens, exemplars or exemplaris, et terminans or finalis of all things, is analyzed by Schadel, I would say, in all its forms, its possible forms throughout the history of ideas. And this concept of an analogia entis or trinitatis, everything that exists in space and time participates in a specifically limited way in an intrinsically unlimited three-dimensional actuality. This is, I think, a very a good formulation. This analogia entis or trinitatis was replaced in the modernity by a subject-centered way of thinking. This is also very important to understand Schadel. So Schadel used to mention a fragment of a letter of Descartes, dated November 1640, in which Descartes responded to Mersenne about the alleged similarity of his cogito ergo sum to the Augustinian si fallor sum and result in indwelling of esse nosse velle. And he says about this alleged similarity, without any consideration of merit. He says, that is only an image de la Trinité, so an image of the Trinity, that has nothing to do with philosophy. He doesn't say that explicitly, but that's only an image of the Trinity. My principle instead is moi qui pense, so me who I think. And according to Schadel, modus mentis and modus entis are here immediately fused. So Schadel speaks of a short circuit, Kurzschluss, between modus mentis and modus entis. And this repression of the ground of being, which can be described with Heidegger as forgetfulness of being, is to be understood, according to Schadel, actually as forgetfulness of the triadic coherence of being or of the Trinity. This repression produced a rationalism which placed every being in itself, so the thing in itself, beyond the knowable. And Schadel's interpretation of Kant is very interesting. Based on Augustine's interpretation of the three principal sciences, so physics, logic, and ethics, which were handed down in Hellenistic philosophy, Schadel sees the three so-called higher mental faculties, so feeling, thinking, and willing, which are treated by Kant separately in the three critiques, as a non-triadic rhythm. So feeling relates receptively to being. Thinking is responsible for clarifying and structuring the received content. And so what has been clarified. And willing is about gaining the impulse to translate what has been clarified into practice. The priority of a critical consideration of the mental faculties that we find in Kant as a necessary condition of human thinking, acting, and feeling implies the absolute prioritization of the logical over the ontic and the ethical. And this prioritization, so this integration of this ontologo-ethical wholeness implies a transition from content related to absolute abstraction. We can find this also everywhere in Schadel's writings. So inhaltsbezogene Abstraktion, content-related abstraction, and total abstraction, total abstraction. So it is assumed that nothing can be assumed in the act of knowing. This results in a constructivism that tries to ground itself in the lack of ground. And Hegel's dialectic is, according to Schadel, a clear example of this. So it tries to deduce everything from a concept and posits the one and the other as negatively identical. It does not show how the other emerges from the one, comes from the one. And this lack of integration, of integrative wholeness, is prolonged in modern science with its conception of knowledge as application of an abstract methodology, and in modern ethics with its conception of freedom as total individual independence. That's the contradiction we can see in our world. This total individual independence remains, let's say, trapped in a factual dependence on a mechanism that reduces reality to quantity, that means to pure abstraction. That is the techno-economic mechanism that we know very well. Yes, this is a mechanism, pure abstraction, that appears to be completely self-referential and completely automated. So to overcome current nihilism, it is necessary to bring the technical economic aspect back to the ground of being, and its intrinsic finality. We have seen that the act of being is in nec consistens, so the finality is a third moment. If we prioritize, if we see only the second moment, then we have what we have just said. So accumulation of quantitative, of pure abstraction, abstract methodology in technology, and lack of ethics. So freedom becomes independence, individual independence. In this sense, so we have to go back to the ground of being and its intrinsic finality. In this sense, a renewed inner awareness, we could say a renewed interiority, a renewed inner awareness as a metaphysical and religious awareness, in the literal sense of the Latin religare, is necessary. And this is what Schadel tries to do. So in order to follow the path of a new inner awareness as a metaphysical and religious awareness, Schadel refers to some authors of early modernity who took up the Augustinian act of self-certainty, the si fallo sum and esse nosse velle that we have seen, which is the core also of Schadel's reflections. They took up these, esse nosse velle and integrated it with the modern demands of universality and freedom. These authors are so important for him for this reason. So it is not going back to a pre-modern view. The demands of so modern demands of universality and freedom cannot be denied, and they took up the Augustinian act of self-certainty. These authors are Campanella, Comenius, and Leibniz. For time reasons, I will now only consider Campanella and in particular Comenius. So Campanella was not treated, actually not treated systematically by Schadel, but by myself in my doctoral dissertation. However, I consider my dissertation in all respects as the result of a joint work with Schadel. So it was inspired by him and guided by him. So I will treat also Campanella so my work about Campanella as a result of the research of the Bamberg School. I would like to mention some key concepts from Campanella and Comenius that have become part of Schadel's philosophical lexicon, and I would like to briefly clarify the connection that links these two authors, Campanella and Comenius, according to Schadel, because in this link, according to Schadel, we can find a way out of the actual nihilism. So starting from the same integral doubt of Descartes and from his same integral need for truth and freedom, Campanella takes up the Augustinian esse nosse velle and reconstructs the ground of being, that inseparabilis distinctio, which cannot be in time, reconstructed it as a mutual indwelling, as a toticipation, he says, we'll see now the concept, as a mutual indwelling of the so-called primalities or primalities, primalitates in Latin, power, wisdom, and love, so potentia, sapientia, amor. Power is here to be understood as the ontic dimension of the act of being, so as insistence, and it has therefore nothing to do with the Aristotelian potency as opposed to actuality. Power is the act of being, is the ontic dimension of the act of being, so insistence, I would say. So according to Campanella, man has limited participation in the unlimited, so divine ground of being. And in order to express this pure positive unity, this pure positivity of the divine ground of being, Campanella introduced the neologism toticipatio, which is formed analogously to participatio, participation. So Schadel used this concept very often. The primalities, power, wisdom, and love communicate with each other through toticipation, Campanella says. And Campanella does not overlook the deficit that is characteristic of every participant by virtue of the fact that it cannot be identical with the origin. So every participant that participates in the toticipation, and he describes the totality of the deficit with a negative triad. The totality of the deficit as powerlessness, it's not easy to say, so lack of power, unwisdom and unlove or hatred, so impotentia, insipientia, disamo. And the negative is, this is the most important thing. The negative is clearly located in the dimension of space and time, and thus preventing the concept of self-relativization of the absolute, as in Hegel, for example. So the negative is in space and time, not in the ground of being, which is and cannot not be. So these are the basic philosophical coordinates that Schadel found so interesting in Campanella. As we mentioned, Schadel did not deal systematically with Campanella, but certainly with Comenius, with many writings and also editions of his works. And his philosophical rediscovery of Comenius was the main reason for his doctorate honoris causa here in Olomouc. So Comenius, we can understand Comenius if we understand that he explicitly adopted Campanella's theory of doctrine of primalities, Campanella's ternary power, wisdom, and love or goodness, and adopted his concept of toticipation. He characterized toticipation as communicatio totius naturae, but knows the concept of toticipation very well. And in Comenius, a further development of Campanella's doctrine of primalities or primalities can be observed insofar as he endeavored to implement this integral theory into an integral practice, an integral theory that he called pansophy, into a concrete integral practice. So the toticipation of power, wisdom, and love expresses the world transcendent basis of communication, which as a criterion of reality underlies the world immanent communication of individual people, nations, cultures, and religions. So that is, I think, the most important thing, at least for me, but I think it was for Schadel. Despite the terrible situation of his time with the 30 Years' War, continuous persecutions, we could say, despite the terrible situation of our time, Comenius did not resign, but sought out the positive fundamentals of politics, philosophy, and religion, and above all, tried to bring their, we could say, their participation, of course, in our world, so it's not the pure participation, so the distinct and composite connection, their participation into view. That's something very important for me. So the terrible situation of his time could be described with Campanella. Comenius knows very well this negative triad, as tyranny in politics, as sophism in philosophy, and hypocrisy in religion. Comenius did not resign and tried to bring the participative connection of politics, philosophy, and religion into view. And it is clear to him, as a theologian, that a purely religious reformation would be ineffective unless politics and philosophy are reformed at the same time. And he therefore emancipates politics and philosophy as equal sisters, he says, of religion, and invites representatives of these three areas, politics, philosophy, and religion, to a universal consultation, Consultatio Catholica, which should lead to an integral reform inspired by communion, communication, and harmony. In the Consultatio Catholica, I would just mention one thing that is very important for me, and was very important for Schadel. In the Consultatio Catholica, Comenius tries to identify this participative dynamic in the Greek word for community or state, polis, which he derives from the verb poleo, which means I turn, I revolve. So every moment in a political community, as in the perichoresis, turns to the others and is in this turning. I turn means poleo. And Schadel argues that linguistically more correctly, Comenius should have traced the word polis back to the verb pelo, which originally means also I revolve, but also I am. And this verb, pelein, is used by Parmenides as a synonym of being, as being, means being, I am. Pelein, pelo, I am. So it's used, Parmenides says, pelein kai ukenai, so being and non-being. Pelein is being in its contrast to non-being. And as we have seen, Parmenides represents being through the symbol of the sphere, of the circle. We are now in a room which is called the rotunda. This is something is nice. So sphere, which this symbol allows the inner dynamics of being to be represented as a participative indwelling of center, radius, and circumference. So polis is this participative dynamics. And what is suggested, so from poleo or apello, that's the same. What is suggested in any case is that in this word, politics represents the insistent center of communion, philosophy the existent radius of communication, so the process of bringing differences to expression, and religion the consistent circumference of harmony, so the return to a unity in which differences are preserved. This is Comenius' view, according to Schadel. So at the threshold of the modern process of rationalization, Comenius endeavored to use the principle of harmony to demonstrate triadic analogous references in the most diverse areas of reality. Several works could be mentioned here. I would at least like to mention Comenius' Trietium Catholicum, which inspired the name of Dr. Fiedel's research group. There we can find many examples. For Schadel, his exemplary relevance, so of Comenius, of Campanella, of Leibniz, but we don't have time now to mention Leibniz. Their exemplary relevance lies in the fact that they are able to offer a model for another modernity. So the modernity of an INEC consistential modernity, where it becomes possible to track down the triadic basic rhythm and, I am quoting, make it fruitful as a fundamental and optimal basic form of being, as the basis of being of reasonable freedom. The German expression is very interesting. Seinsbasis vernünftiger Freiheit. So to make it fruitful as a fundamental and optimal basic form of being, as the basis of being of reasonable freedom for the purpose of a consistent design of the future. A different modernity, an integral modernity, we could say, in which, that's the most important thing here, in which universality and freedom, so the most important demands of modernity, are of course preserved. So this, I think this expression is this formulation is a wonderful formulation. Seinsbasis vernünftiger Freiheit. Maybe it works well only in German, because the key is the verb vernehmen, which is not easy to translate. Nehmen means to take. Vernehmen, Vernunft is to take. And to understand, as we say, to understand like the German verstehen, davor stehen, so that is to stand in front, indicates a formal act, to understand, to stand in front. Reason, ratio, reri is again a formal act, is to calculate originally. But verstehen instead indicates knowing as receptive towards reality. It is not a standing in front, but a clarifying from within. And the vernünftige Freiheit, so the reasonable is not a nice term, but the reasonable freedom, whose ground of being Schadel wants to make explicit, is therefore not a formal freedom, but a concrete acting as a returning to the unity of reality through the differences, after having clarified its intrinsic structure. Yeah, I like this expression, and was also used very often by Schadel as a concrete representation of his inner consistential perspective. So at the end of all this, we could say actually nothing new, because we saw that this process of unlimited communication and harmony, that is the Trinitarian God, we can find this process, this inner consistential process, to use Schadel's terminology, in so many authors, as we have seen, throughout the history of ideas, of philosophy, of religion. But Schadel has systematically reconstructed the coherence of this process, of this fundamental process, really throughout the entire history of ideas and mentalities, and not only Christian history, but also, and not only Western history, not only Christian and not only Western history. So he has reconstructed the coherence of this process as perhaps no one else has done. And he has made its theoretical and practical relevance, meaning explicit, to overcome current nihilism. So the current crisis humanity is facing, which is the separation of the three moments we have seen. So this is why, in my opinion, it is urgent to rediscover Erwin Schadel, and I hope I was able to make a little contribution so that this can at least start to happen in the current debate on Trinitarian ontology. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much, Matteo, for this beautiful lecture and introduction to the works and thought and conceptions of Bamberg Trinitarian School, including Beck and Schadel. So we have now the time for questions and answers. So if there are any questions in Rotunda, in our circle, you are free to ask. So Tomáš,
maybe I can start. I have one question concerning Campanella and his primalities. We were reading with students his Città del Sole, where this primalities penetrates the structure of his idea of idea rei publicae. By means of these three rulers, Pons in More. Yeah. And but the structure of the society which Campanella describes is authoritative, militant, with eugenism, and I think nobody would like to live in this society. Maybe although Campanella says that everybody wants to live there. So my question is, and well, I don't have the answer. Where is the connection between this ontotriadism of primalities and the structure of the society which he describes? If this society, as he describes, is the consequence of this.
Yeah, what you say is very important. I would be very honest, so has nothing to do with his doctrine of primalities. It is a symbol which is influenced by his time, and that's why Comenius is so important for me, because he translates into practice what Campanella reconstructs in theory. Yeah, it is the Città del Sole is a symbol, and as a symbol is influenced in very strongly by so many things, by a mentality which is not in accordance to his theory. So very honestly said. That's why Comenius is so important. Campanella, for some reasons, it is maybe this is not possible to mention here. Cannot see a coherent translation of his theory into practice. What Comenius does.
Okay. But I think the question is very important, because in Campanella it's it seems so that this is the result of.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
There are pros and cons in every author. You found so these are clearly cons. I have no problem in saying that. That's why I said I will be honest.
Yeah.
So for some reasons, he did not succeed in clarifying what means translating into practice what he had reconstructed in theory.
Yeah, thank you.
And what could be the reason for it, for this failure? It's his personal story. He was persecuted, or
I think so. That's why I'm saying so. 27 years in jail. I think it's but that's the same. That's the same thing in Comenius. You could say also Comenius. So the terrible situation he lived in is clear as the 30 Years' War. The reason for that is the translation into practice of his theory is very very deeply influenced by political, social conditions, by his particular mentality. So he did not succeed in translating this theory in a coherent way into practice. Yeah, we could mention a lot of reasons. They are really related to his time, his mentality, and what happened with him. So 30 years long in jail, and was extremely difficult for him to write.
Maybe if I may, I would have a question which might a little bit follow up the previous question, and I would like to ask about Comenius, and I would like to ask about the universal consultation, which you mentioned, Consultatio Catholica, and in that part you spoke about politics, philosophy, and religion as different perspectives which might somehow cooperate in the reformation and in the liberation of society. Maybe could you explain it more deeply? What are the internal relations between these three perspectives? Are they like conceptualized as totally independent, or is there any kind of hierarchical relationship between them, or how to think about their relations?
Yeah, this is also a very good question. Not easy to answer. What we have is a suggestion, I think. So politics may be the symbol of power, philosophy of wisdom, and religion of theology, religion of love. And we could. So the idea is what I mentioned, I think, at the end of my presentation. So the idea is that politics represents the communion, which is the basis. So the insistence of human beings. You could say religion should be the basis. There are different interpretations. I think we have to see, the positive in what they suggest, but many interpretations are possible. But I think how he sees this connection in Campanella. Campanella speaks of tyranny, sophism, and hypocrisy. He sees this connection in this sense. Politics is the basis, the communio of human being, the insistence. Philosophy is called. Philosophy should express, science and philosophy, differences. So they should allow differences to come to expression. And religion is responsible, let's say, responsible for love. So it's going back to the unity through the differences. The political dimension is not a mediated dimension in this case. As already said, you could suggest that instead religion should be the basis. But I think the logic behind this is clear. So our basis is a political one. Science and philosophy should bring differences to expression. That's why he invites everyone to a universal consultation, which is a communication process. Not only in philosophy, he invites representatives from all areas. And religion, as already said, should be the return to a unity through the differences. Should be participation in the same God, so in the same process. And it is clear that human being is a limited being and is called to realize, we could say, his consistence in communication and harmony with the other. The other is other human beings, other beings in general, so nature, and God itself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
So again, it would be possible to interpret it in different ways, but I think the logic behind is very clear.
Yeah, and the way, as you put it, the first move of unity and the second move of differentiation and the third movement of completion in love, it's really illuminating.
Yeah, you could say that religion, that's a suggestion, that this would be a suggestion for a dialogue. Religion would be religion. If you say that religion is this connection to being, to the ground of being, but only as connection to being. So it could be dangerous. It would become fideism. Mm-hmm. It's just and something personal, a personal connection to being. It's the return to unity through the differences. And politics is the same, but you could say the same for politics. So politics, which is not enriched through differences, it's not democratic politics. So I think there are many suggestions, and we can interpret this logic in different ways. But the most important thing is that these three moments are to be intended as a participation, or participation could be also dangerous if you don't understand, if you don't explain what it means. An inseparable difference. So neither politics nor religion cannot be can be unity without differences, and they try to explain this process in that way. But it is, I think communists would be open to other suggestions and other ways to. that's the reason. That's the reason for the universal consultation. Yes. So the communists would be happy to discuss other suggestions. But the logic behind these should be clear.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matteo, for this explanation. It's a very interesting thing, actually. When you imagine the structure of Pansophy, there is a beginning, and this beginning is rather, philosophical. It's it's this archetype, words of archetypes. So it's a kind of contemplation of ideas, and then you go through the Pansophic words. Towards a practical, political, moral word, and at the end you have this religious word of spiritual realities. That's in the end. But the structure is a little bit different than what you have just described. You know, when you begin with politics as a kind of basic reality, that sounds extremely interesting actually, because it's a acceptance of real relations. We are involved, genealogical relations, political relations, in our communities as the fundamental topos or place, locus of being, of reality, and which then expresses itself within ideality, within philosophy, and culminates in a kind of liturgical, spiritual, religious unity at the end.
Sorry to interrupt you. Acceptance, you are right, but also, so this unity has to be expressed in a variety of differences, of course. Yeah, sorry. But it's a fundamental acceptance of the being together of human beings.
I've been always thinking about the problem whether in Pansophy, this first step, to begin with the archetypes, to begin with the actually with the possibilities, with the what is possible in God. That's the first word. If it is not again a kind of absolutization of logic in a sense, but I think Comenius does not think about it this way. It's a priority of real ideas in God. It's not a priority of only thinkable or logical ideas. It's a priority of the archetype of the Trinity actually. So therefore I'm a little bit surprised by this triad when you begin with politics. That's as a kind of reality of real relations and community.
So it's I think a very concrete way to see things. But they would be open, Comenius at least, Campanella for other reasons. As we said, Comenius would be open to, I think, to these suggestions. Again, this dynamics is what matters here, and if we see, for instance, if we destroy these dynamics and we focus on the second, on an abstraction of the second moment, so formal reasoning, this would be not possible. This would be not scientific. So modern culture thinks this is not a scientific discussion now, because there's, you could say whatever you want, they would say. But this is the problem. So truth is, of course, something more than formal coherence. And again, I think the most important thing is the dynamics, and then we are open because we are limited. We are limited beings, of course. And when we think something unlimited, we still are limited, and it's I think openness with openness within the dynamics we said is the only thing possible. Comenius is an example of that. And this is a dynamics in which everyone can express himself, of course.
Are there any further questions? If not, I have one more for our guest. Matteo, it will be a little bit hard question, How would you describe the fate of Bamberg Trinitarian School? It's a success or failure, and what are the reasons for this development? Because in Bamberg there is no school anymore, and when you look at the development of the philosophy of 20th century, you can recognize, of course, analytic tradition, phenomenology. Where is the place for triadic ontology in this way, how it was developed in Bamberg?
Here in Olomouc. Honestly, in Bamberg, of course, not anymore. So that's the lack of openness, I think. I will be very honest. So people came to Bamberg from the analytical tradition, and they deleted in a brutal way, in my opinion, the whole tradition. This is of course not openness. It's the contrary, and nothing remains of the Bamberg school in Bamberg. Nothing. It was deleted. So the place, if you want an honest answer, the place to it is, as already said, no coincidence that Schadel received. Schadel was never adequately recognized, neither in Germany. So it was not, I have to say, not treated well. I shouldn't say this, maybe, but it's not. It's the truth. So I think this is an extremely rich tradition, heritage, that must be preserved, and honestly, the only place where I see this preservation possible is here. I started from here, of course, I hope. Yeah.
And what are the weaknesses of this Bamberg Trinitarian school?
So
the weaknesses, limits of it.
Yeah, this is
in your view.
Yeah, this is
because you have known Schadel.
Yeah. Oh, this is a very good question. It's a difficult question because I have many ideas. So, from my personal point of view, but this is, of course, my personal point of view. Schadel underlies the coming of wisdom from being. I would say in a no coherent way. In what sense? If you just the example of feeling. When you say feeling, if you can read Descartes in the Meditaciones. It is explicit when he says, "I will stop. I will not hear, not see, nothing. Cogito ergo sum." So this is a pure abstraction. And he says feelings is so the faculty of feeling, also in Kant, is reception towards being, towards the spontaneity of being. Is reception, and thinking is about structuring what comes from feeling. I am more, I would say, Platonic. In what sense? Thinking is not always just structuring what comes from reality, or what comes from empirical reality, I would say. So from feeling, for instance, so there's it's a huge question, an old question. What comes from empirical reality could be not true. And this aspect is not treated systematically. I had many discussions with him about this. So I'm more, I would say I'm also a bit Hegelian I wouldn't say this now, but in the sense that goodness for us limited beings, is actually a contradictory unity of knowledge and reality. But the mistake of Hegel is to think that goodness in absolute is a contradictory unit. For human beings who are limited beings, it is actually so. It's also so. Life, if you see it from a limited point of view, is actually also tragic. Mm-hmm. The mistake of Hegel, and I agree with Schadel, is to think that this deficit belongs to the ground of the absolute. And but I think there's a short circuit sometimes in Schadel, also in Schadel regarding this relationship between being and thinking. It is paradoxically they are fused sometimes, as in Descartes. And in Beck, I would say, this is my personal opinion. In Beck, you can find many triads which are contingent triads. Brings so many examples from, also very interesting example, for instance, from the interculturality, so the encounter of world cultures. There are wonderful writings, but it becomes dangerous when you apply this triadic dynamics to everything, without underlying the difference between something that in any case remains a formulation, a formal truth and reality. And there's again that problem that I find also in Schadel. So this connection between this relationship between being and thinking is not clarified in the best of ways, in my opinion.
Thank you, Matteo.
So you don't have to accept. Thinking doesn't mean that you accept what is reality, because reality. What is reality? That's the question. Could be empirical reality. Could be something very negative. And you could say that if you think of it, to extract the essential structure means that you know that something is positive or negative, but you have to clarify it. That sounds like in idealism for Schadel sometimes. So you thinking is immediately being. And there's a dialectical relation, in my opinion, that must be clarified better. Yeah. But this is a personal.
Thank you, Matteo. Thank you. So if there are no more questions or comments, I think we can thank our guest again for his beautiful lecture. Thank you, Matteo.
It was a pleasure.
And it's a great also opportunity to announce our next research seminar with a guest from Prague, actually, Professor Lenka Karfíková, and she will come on 28th of March to present her new translation of Augustine's De Trinitate. Huh. So we will have a great opportunity to go exactly into the problem of inseparability of those inner movements of soul or of all the reality we have just discussed in your paper, Matteo.
Mm-hmm.
So you all are of course very much invited also for this next seminar. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.